And good morning. This is Steve Youngdahl with Make a Difference Ventures, and
Walt Teeter, also with Make a Difference Ventures.
we're managing directors here. Our third managing director is, he's in a conference right now, so we're going to have to wing it without him. And
we can still say bad things about him.
We
since he's
can.
not here.
I believe we can actually get away with that. One of the very, very popular questions that we get these days, it revolves around a lot of buzz about data centers and mining operations and how much electricity they use, and then what's the carbon footprint of that electricity. Well, thankfully, Walt's in town today, and he knows quite a bit about that because he's been actually very actively working on a data center that wants to be green. So they wanted to be green. Obviously, they reached out to us. So, Walt, what do you say about that?
Sure. I say let's maybe start with a little background. So, when Steve and I grew up, we had those old nice black dial phones with the cords attached to them, and that was state of the art for that time. So obviously now everyone has smartphones and they're streaming video and video on demand. And so, for example, every time George goes out and makes one of his famous TikTok dance routines,
yes,
that's got to be stored someplace. Or when you're pulling down your latest Netflix series, or everyone now, you've got probably 20,000 photographs on your phone and they're all high definition and you're in the cloud. So that all has to be stored somewhere. And so one of the fastest growing segments of energy consumption and fastest growing segments of the economy is data production, data storage, data handling. It is an enormously energy intensive business. You'll see parts of the country, let's say in Northern Virginia or in the Pacific Northwest, where by far the largest growth in energy consumption is managing these data centers and processing centers and storage.
That's amazing to me, by the way. I mean, how come they use up so much energy?
There's just lots and lots of content out there, and it's stored, and much of the internet is constantly backed up. And let's say when you have blockchain technology and you have a public key, it's not just one party that stores that. It may be stored by 100,000 different parties, the same chain. And so you're multiplying the amount of data that has to be stored throughout the world. It's not just a North American or OECD phenomenon. That some of the fastest, by far the fastest growing markets are in Asia, the emerging economies there. And then so people, next question, well, just how big is this and how fast are the economies growing? So let's give an example. Everyone's very focused in the US, in Europe, in Japan and Korea on reducing the carbon footprint. It's large. It's a large impact everywhere. But if you look at the world right now, if you take just China and India together, they have more coal power plants under construction than the US and Europe has coal plants combined.
Wait, under construction?
Under construction.
Apparently they're not going very green, are they?
Well, not really. And so, in a lot of that, obviously, as the economies grow, the energy consumption and reaching out to let's say a farmer now in his rice paddy would have that mobile phone, would have maybe a computer at home for the kids. And so you're seeing explosive growth in energy consumption, much of it driven by technology across the whole rapidly developing Asian continent. And so obviously that's a focus. So here, back closer to home and throughout the world, we're looking at how do we help maximize our impact. And so we've always talked about the whole value chain makes a difference. So it's not just mining the materials and then producing the energy generation equipment and then transporting that energy and then consuming it. So by focusing on the entire value chain, we maximize the impact. A great example on the data centers, the first piece was what's the state of the art to reduce power consumption. So let's say if you were going to consume a gigawatt, right, 1,000 megawatts of power, which is really where you are on a large data center now. If you can reduce that, you're reducing the whole amount of inputs that have to go into that. So, for example, the ones that we're working with now, the data center developers are looking at a 40% more efficient system. So in other words, getting the same work done for 40% less power. Well, that means
That's a huge impact.
it's a huge impact, and it's a huge impact on the whole piece, which means, and we're looking at a completely zero emissions profile for the really a standalone um, showcase data center. And so, yes, it's zero emissions, but we also look at life cycle.
That sounds like that could be expensive.
Well, it can be. So we spent a good deal of time with the team focusing on how do we go about setting this up and building it, designing it, building and operating it in both an energy efficient and environmentally friendly and economically efficient manner. And we've been able to optimize some of the systems as we integrate it to reduce what's called parasitic load. So in other words, reduce the waste of the power production going to the data center. So looking at it one way, if you're already reducing the need by 40%, and we're looking at reducing the losses by up to 40% as well, that's an amazing impact on the end result, meaning how much.
So the parasitic part is another 40%?
In some cases, when you go to have a zero carbon approach, there's a lot of sort of switching back and forth that's done. And so therefore, by focusing on the entire value chain, we come up with a very economic solution, not only for the data center operator, but also for the users of that data center. So much less power is consumed, and the power that is consumed is green.
So it's I just want to make sure I understand this. It's greener. It's more cost efficient to build and more cost efficient to run.
Exactly.
Well, that's the trifecta, I think.
It
what
really
they call
is.
That,
it really is the trifecta here, and so that's over the coming months as we move that forward. That's really a showcase piece as far as transitioning the most rapidly growing segment of the economy, meaning the information technology segment, transitioning that over to a sustainable position.
Right. So now is every because I know we're looking at more than one data center, and is everyone the same?
No, they're all. Depending on where you are geographically in the world, it impacts things. Like for example, some areas are good for solar. Some have hydro resources. Some have strong wind resources. Some have none of the above.
Yeah.
And so just depending on where things are and then how reliable the operator wants things to be. So it maybe if you have some casual requirements for data, you don't have to have 100% reliability. If you're doing something like medical records or financial records, something that's really critical to people and to society, well, then you have to have extremely reliable power and extremely reliable computing power. And so it really depends on what the requirements of that specific location and center are as to how we go about designing the system.
Okay. So sounds like we're pretty close to implementing one of these, but how long does it take to build it?
Well, actually, again, depending on the size, but on the smaller scale, it's a period of months.
Wow.
So especially in the cases where we don't have a material environmental impact. So in other words, we're not impacting the air or the water quality. So there's no need for what's called a new source review. So we're not having a negative impact on the environment around us. Therefore, it speeds up the process.
So I've heard, or read in the news that Zuckerberg or Facebook, I guess that's one and the same, built a mining center, and it's powered off of a coal-fired power plant. I don't think that's very green. And then, on top of that, A, doesn't have a green source, but B, is he using any of these advanced technologies that you talked about to reduce the power consumption?
Well, that's actually really an interesting point. Is the reason it's built next to coal plants is in many parts of the world, coal is a very inexpensive power source.
Right.
And so that's why we're focused on ensuring that the systems we design allow the consumers of our power to be competitive with those alternatives. Now, obviously,
That's tough.
It is tough. Now, in some parts of the world, say, for example, in Europe now, you're seeing high levels of carbon taxation that are helping to levelize the playing field for us.
Okay.
And in California, similarly.
Right.
And so obviously looking forward, The Biden administration has made a commitment to move forward with carbon taxation in the U.S. And Canada already has it. So we're seeing movement, strong movement in the OECD toward carbon taxation, either through cap and trade or direct taxation. For example, in California, you're seeing the value of the what's called the low carbon fuel standard. The credits are really popping up pretty strongly in value as the existing credit pool becomes depleted. And so I think over the coming years, we're really going to see impacts from that standard. And obviously, California is a state with a huge number of data centers and data processing.
That's a big chunk of their economy.
It really is.
That's a huge amount. And they're, that's going to do nothing but grow. And they're having issues with, closing power plants that use energy that they don't like. I think they're in a pickle.
There are a lot of challenges out there. And one of the things that's not broadly recognized, because we talk about California being in drought, which it is that almost 40% of its electricity relies on hydroelectricity. Not all produced in the state, but also imported.
I've seen pictures of the dams. I mean, the water level's way down.
Way down. And historically, if you look at the geological record, the last 100 years is the anomaly when they get rain. The normal state of affairs is a desert.
Oh, wow.
So there's ongoing challenges there. So the way we see it is every time we can go and impact positively the next block of requirement. In other words, you may not displace an existing data center, but as you build new ones, building them much more efficiently, and then eventually the old ones get shut down.
So I've heard you talk about pre-grid power. So can you explain what that means?
Certainly. So what that means is we produce the power. It's dedicated to the data center so that it can operate on grid, meaning connected to the rest of the world's power or the rest of the country's power, or it can operate off grid, meaning it can isolate from the grid and simply work on its own. And that's really helpful in cases, let's say, where you have a natural disaster, an earthquake or a flood, et cetera. We see that all the time.
Or in California, the sun goes down, they have a blackout.
Right. Or where I live in Puerto Rico, when the hurricane came through, it wiped out completely the largest solar farm in
But
the
these
territory.
data centers run 24/7.
They run, and they have to run 24/7. So when you go to use your ATM card at 10 o'clock at night, you wouldn't be very happy if it said, oops.
So it's critical. It's critical that these are running and they have a reliable power source.
It is. So everything you do, when you call your Uber on your phone, it's got to go through a database. When you go with a credit card to pay for dinner or movie, it has to go through a database. So these must be reliable and run all the time.
I think Mary Kate has a question.
All right, guys. So our chat's asking, do you know what % of carbon emissions data centers account for?
What percentage of carbon emissions data centers account for?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, I'm not 100% sure. I looked into this the other day. I believe globally it's about 6% of emissions are for data, technology, transmission, et cetera. It's a high percentage.
That's huge. I didn't realize that. You skipped over something, and I want to go back and maybe give you and have you give a little deeper explanation. But when you were talking about, the carbon footprint of the value chain, what's the definition of the value chain?
I think the way I look at it is, so let's say we want to build a solar farm.
Okay.
Right. Well, it doesn't just appear out of the air. So you have to go mine the materials. And that means you have to get the very high quality silica. It sounds like sand, but it's got to be specialized. You need the metals to go with it. You need the cobalt, silver, some of the gallium, arsenides.
They all need to be mined.
They all need to be mined. They need to be transported from the mine to the refinery. They need to be refined. They need to be further transported to the manufacturing facilities where they're remelted and recast into what ultimately becomes a module. That module has to be packaged. It has to be shipped. It has to be installed. All the ancillary equipment and cables and racks and ground clearing and heavy equipment to move. All of that goes into that carbon footprint. So the challenge is even 0 point emissions, call it solar or wind, does not mean it's zero value chain emissions.
Right. Yeah, that
So
sounds like
you're
it.
creating carbon emissions throughout that entire piece. And then the real bugaboo, which we really as a society have not addressed at all adequately, is the end of life issues for those generation
See,
pieces.
he used a very technical term there, which was bugaboo, and but it's a very important one because you just brought up something that's going to be a tidal wave coming at us.
It is coming. It is coming at the world. So you're seeing that this year in Germany, where they're dismantling more windmills than they're putting up, and especially in a densely populated country, what do you do with those parts? So the blades really cannot be recycled. The concrete in the base is not economical or environmentally sound to recycle it. So yeah, you get some steel from the tower and maybe some copper from the windings and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of that windmill is not recyclable.
What do they do with it?
Basically, level the ground and bury the blades.
Wow.
And then some of them have some fun stuff in the epoxies and everything to make those blades.
Yeah, they don't sound very environmentally friendly as far as
They're
the
not.
composite materials.
But they're healthier than the solar cells.
Aha.
So that's the real challenge. There's been a few small scale, it's called experimental size. First Solar's done that on recycling, but it's not only very challenging technically, but it requires enormous amounts of energy to then go re-separate all these pieces.
So we're back in the value chain, but we're on the back end of it now.
Back end of it.
So now you need to recycle a panel that has a lot of toxic material in it, right?
Right.
Okay. And you have to do it in a safe and environmentally friendly way. Now we're back to using more energy resources to be able to do that effectively.
Exactly, which is why one of our big focuses on what we're doing here is simply to minimize the scope of the kit that we require.
Okay.
Because the less that we require, the less it has to be built, the less it has to be operated and cleaned, and the less it ultimately has to be disposed of or hopefully recycled. So I look at it right now as the plane is taken off, it's in the air on the large scale renewables, but we don't know where we're going to land.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a solution to recycle or dispose of much of this material.
Or maybe we're not going to land. Maybe we're just going to crash.
Right.
I mean, the small amount of relative to what's out there in the world, the small amount of panels that have been retired. I've seen pictures. A friend of mine in Arizona sent them to me. I mean, they're just stacked up in the desert.
They sure are. And there's going to be a lot more. So as an example, just to show you the scope of what we're talking about, the generation field we're looking at would reduce the amount of materials needed by about 70%. So in other words, we require that much less input.
So that's an immediate impact on the other end.
It's an immediate impact.
Yes. Hey, boss.
What are you guys doing in here?
Oh, come on in.
This doesn't ask me anything.
Yeah, this is.
Gosh, volunteer. Here in town. Hey guys, how's everybody?
We have to say nice things about them now.
No, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
We already got most of our digs in already anyway. So
It
that's
is
good.
wonderful to have you here.
I brought
We
up
love
your-
it when you come up.
I brought up your TikTok videos right off the bat.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
No, that was good. That was good.
That's me, baby.
I think Mary Kate had another one. George is just in time. Did you have another question?
Can you come back to how data centers using mad tech will improve crypto mining and decentralized mining operations?
Yes, certainly. And
That
obviously,
sounds like a technical question, so I'm going to exit. No, actually, I'm in another meeting, but I knew this was going on, and I just wanted to say hi.
thanks
All
for
right.
dropping by, George.
Yeah.
You'll be back for our Christmas special, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Come back again.
With
All right.
Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
Come back again. Call first.
So really, I think the way we look at it is mining is a combination, of course, of processing capacity as well as storage capacity. So what we're looking at is by using more efficient processing and storage capacity, as well as more efficient zero carbon production, we essentially reduce the footprint of any of these memory and processing intensive activities.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, sure.
Sorry about that. Well,
I just jumped ahead. I was so
no,
excited.
I was like, yeah, well, you know what? George came in here and just scrambled the eggs.
Yeah.
So, why don't you give me the question again, Mary?
How our data centers will improve crypto mining and decentralized
Ah.
mining operations?
Okay. So how is our data centers going to improve crypto mining and and the use of that electricity. But I would say that because of our part, it's kind of a two-part question. We have the energy part, but then we go, how come we can use that much less energy? And that's because of the partners that we have.
Exactly. So it's really the way we see it, maximizing the benefit is throughout the activity. So we produce the energy more efficiently, and by more efficiently, I mean we get more watts per acre. At the same time, reducing the footprint and the requirement for the materials that normally go into a solar farm, for example. So it's not just the panels. The farms require the equipment to house, let's say, inverters and control systems and transformers and the racks themselves, whether they're sun following or fixed mounted. There's a lot of steel and aluminum and copper and concrete, a lot of concrete. And concrete's about the most carbon intensive manufacturing product on the planet.
Wow.
I believe out of all industrial processes, concrete production produces the highest emissions of CO2. And as an example, I saw a great figure that in the first 5 years of the 21st century, China produced more concrete than the U.S. did in the entire 20th century.
Whoa.
And so obviously concrete is an enormous
Yes.
emitter. So as we go, we look at every step. How do we reduce this? And therefore, obviously take some of the pressure off
Right.
of the crypto industry, which right now there's a lot of criticism as far as, well, why are we using this hydro to mine rather than for electric cars?
Right.
Or why are we using this wind and solar, which is cheap on some areas? And the question being, why are we using that for mining operations? And we're pushing up the cost of power for the normal consumers and businesses. And so we're looking, how do we address that in a concise package that's sustainable, recyclable, and really moving the ball forward.
So as in a lot of things that we do, we can get more from less. So have a smaller footprint, which means you're using less materials that need to be mined or manufactured.
Right.
And so the value chain of half of what we're doing is far reduced.
It's mined, it's transported, it's manufactured, it's transported again, it's erected, installed, wired, operated, and then through the life cycle to it's recycled or disposed of.
Okay.
Unfortunately, right now it's mostly disposed of.
Okay. So a lot of what we're talking about here is that entire value chain coming up to and then implementing it. Then once we have it on site and it's generating, we have a dramatic reduction in our footprint before we even turn the switch on. Yes,
exactly. And a lot of it goes to looking at every step of the way.
Right.
Where can we do this better than what's been done before?
Everybody is in love with getting energy for nothing. In other words, from the sun or from the wind or from geothermal or for whatever. And that's half the answer. But you can't be blinded by your love of that part and then forget what comes up to it. I mean, that whole piece that, behind it of that value chain, you really need to look at it.
You do. And the earth is a finite resource. And so even when we look at, let's say you could do everything with wind and solar. Let's say, for example, you'll take up an enormous amount of the earth's surface if we don't do things more efficiently.
Right.
And that's forgetting about all the mining it would take to do that.
Yeah.
And so it really is a question of how do we make everything more efficient? How do we get the same value, the same process, the same product, and have less inputs?
Right.
And I know it's maybe a trite approach to say, a penny saved is a penny earned, but
no, I like that one. That's my grandma told me that, and it still holds true to this day.
It does.
Mary Kate, we have more?
Yes, 2 questions. From Matt, would it be a fair or true statement to say that data centers are replacing the need for oil tankers or coal trains?
So repeat that question.
It said, I think if I understood the question right, is it fair to say that data centers are replacing the need for oil tankers or coal trains? I think unfortunately the answer is probably no. Now, the more efficient we use the data and the more efficiently we produce it, the less electricity is needed. So in that case, yes, you could see yourself reducing some coal trains for sure. I think that the challenge is right now, most of oil and oil products are really used for the transportation industry, with the secondary usages in things like refining, chemical plants, etc. And so I think it helps along the way, certainly versus coal consumption. But right now, the data centers are a piece of the puzzle. But let me give you one example on how I think you are reducing oil consumption. So I used to travel a great deal, almost all of which was on the air and using jet fuel like crazy.
Mm.
But during the COVID, let's call it break, we all had, we got a lot more used to video conferencing. And so that on its own, that change, and you saw it last year, that oil consumption dropped due to really travel patterns of people and businesses. Now, obviously, it created a great deal of hardship for many people, but at the same time, these changes on switching over to more video and phone communication obviously have an immediate impact. All of that, let's say you're video conferencing, it's enormous packets of data going through the internet to each other across continents, which once again requires data processing, data transmission. So in that regard, yes, we are substituting data systems for more traditional energy consumption.
Interesting take. Do you have another one, Mary Kate?
If the grid goes down, will the data center still be effective?
Yes, they will. That's why we have this discussion on pre-grid, meaning that, yes, the question being, in a case where the main electricity grid goes down, will the data center concepts that we're implementing be able to function in that environment? And the answer is yes, they will. And that's really the intent, and the requirement is for these data centers to have pre-grid power, meaning the power is produced independent of the main electricity grid. It'll be interconnected when it's feasible to do so, but the centers can run indefinitely, independently, without a connection to the main power grid.
Once your buildings are made, how much would it cost to run your farms?
That actually is our clients' sort of some of their proprietary information, but it's, as I said, roughly 40% less than a benchmark data center.
And that's all I have for now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at about the 30-minute mark. So if you guys want to wrap it up, any finishing thoughts?
Do you have any final thoughts, Walt?
I think it's a really timely topic. We all, and I'm a phone addict just like everyone else. We all consume this product, meaning data and information and video at enormous and increasing pace. And my phone reminds me I spend too much screen time every week.
Yeah.
And so I think this is one of those areas where we're really part of the problem, and it's really important for MAD to be out in front solving a problem that we're part of.
It's someone did some calculations and said by 2050 we're going to need 70% more electricity. The more that we can reduce the current load, the less that you have to produce to meet that demand.
Right.
Because it's there's really two sides of this equation. So anytime we can drop by significant amounts, because these data centers are, they use a lot of power.
There's a lot of power.
And so anytime we can take that down by 40 or more percent, that's just that much less that needs to be new power to be able to meet the demand.
Absolutely.
Do you have any last minute?
Yeah, our final two questions. Is the cooling of data centers and recycling waste heat the biggest challenge facing data centers currently? So the cooling of data.
So the cooling of the data centers and the heat. Okay.
Yes. So two questions. The first being, is the cooling of the processing equipment, is that very energy intensive? And the second is heat recovery from that waste heat. And so the first part of the question, yes, cooling of the data centers and cooling of the machinery is one of the most energy intensive parts of that process. 30 to 40% at least typically is used on cooling. There's different methods of cooling depending on how efficient you are, where in the world you're located. Is it air? Is it liquid? Is it cooling towers? So it is a bit of a broad space, but yes, it's highly energy intensive. The second piece being recovering waste heat. The real challenge with that is the heat from these computers, while it's hot for us as humans, it's what we call low grade heat.
Ah.
So if you're at 100 or 200 degrees Fahrenheit, you really can't do a lot with that
Right.
other than maybe some air conditioning load. You really need a lot hotter to be efficient in producing energy from it. And so unfortunately, the bulk of that energy that's given off by the equipment it's really wasted because there's not an economical way to recover most of it today. As I said, other than recycling, it could be used for air conditioning.
Right.
Will it be easy to increase the size of a data center?
Will it be easy to increase the size of a data center? I'd say yes. In general, they're quite modular, and so therefore you can stack them together pretty efficiently. And obviously, you can have campuses where instead of maybe one building, you might end up building out 15 or 20 at the end of the day to house different types of data, different processing equipment, different uses. So, for example, your setup for mining can be a little different than your setup to store photographs, that sort of thing.
So basically, the size of the campus is really your only limitation.
Yes.
We're good.
Good?
Well,
Mary Kay, I want to thank you very much for pitching in and helping us out with this AMA. Walt, thanks for being in town, man.
well, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no, that's
You're
really
gonna
cool.
buy me lunch, you said, right?
I think I am.
Yeah, all right,
Yes,
that's
it's next Tuesday. Oh wait, you won't be here then. No.
Right.
So anyway, thank you for everybody for tuning in. We will see you next Friday on our Ask Us Anything, and I think that's a wrap.
Thanks.